The photograph rested exactly where it shouldn't have been, wedged behind a drawer in an old cedar chest, its edges too crisp, its colors too vivid to have survived more than a century. At first glance, it was nothing extraordinary: a mother with her gentle half-smile, a proud father stiff in his Sunday coat, and 3 children posed neatly in front of their home. But the longer I stared, the more my attention sank into the small figure at the edge. The youngest son. His face was strangely pale, even for an early 20th century exposure, and there was a stillness in his eyes that didn't match the softness of the others. Something about him pulled at me, like a whisper threaded between the grains of the photograph. I should have set it aside, logged it, and moved on, but fascination has a way of pretending to be harmless. I kept the picture on my desk, telling myself it was nothing more than a puzzle from the past. Yet every time I glanced toward it, the boy's presence pressed a little deeper into the room, as if he were waiting for me to notice something I hadn't yet understood. The air grew colder in the corner where the photo sat today. My nights grew shorter. And soon, I began to feel there was someone else in the house with me, someone small, someone quiet, someone who had been forgotten for so long that he no longer knew how to wait patiently. Rhea had always heard the townspeople speak about Briar Hollow with a kind of hushed superstition, but she never imagined she'd find herself standing at its gates, staring at a place that seemed to breathe with its own uneasy life. The trees leaned toward her like eavesdroppers, their bark rough and dark as though burned from the inside. The air was heavy, not with mist, but with something colder, something that felt aware of her presence long before she arrived. She had driven for hours on a road that grew narrower and more abandoned with every mile, guided only by her brother's last voicemail, cutting in and out, filled with static, and ending on a sound that didn't belong to any human throat. The message had been enough to pull her back to the town she'd sworn never to return to. Now that she was here, every instinct screamed that she had made a mistake. As she stepped forward, her boots sank slightly into the soft ground, which felt strangely warm despite the chill in the air. The forest around her made no sound. No birds. No wind. Not even the faint rustle of leaves. It was as if the world had stopped breathing the moment she crossed the boundary into the hollow. She tried calling her brother's name, but her voice seemed to evaporate, swallowed before it could travel. It reminded her of being a child again, trapped in those long, silent nights when she felt something standing just outside her bedroom door, waiting for her to look. Those memories were the reason she left. The reason she never looked back until now. The deeper she walked into the woods, the more she sensed that she was being observed. Not watched, observed. Studied. The sensation pressed against her neck and spine, bending her forward slightly as if the weight of attention grew heavier with each step. Every tree seemed positioned intentionally, forming narrowing corridors that guided her, as though the forest didn't want her wandering freely. It wanted her directed, funneled, drawn in. And the more she moved, the more familiar the surroundings became, almost disturbingly so. A crooked oak she once carved her initials into as a child. A moss-covered stone she remembered tripping over during a childhood game. Landmarks she hadn't seen in over a decade, somehow untouched by time, waiting exactly where she left them. Either the hollow preserved memories, or it had been expecting her return. Rhea continued deeper into Briar Hollow, guided not by the fading light above but by the persistent feeling that something was pulling her forward, drawing her toward the truth she wished she didn't need to find. She tried replaying her brother's voicemail in her head, trying to decode the trembling breaths between the words, the metallic scraping in the background, and that final sound, like a voice layered over another voice, overlapping in a way a human throat couldn't produce. The more she thought about it, the more she realized he hadn't just been scared. He had been warning her, and now she feared she was too late to understand what he meant. Her phone had no signal, every attempt to call him only echoed back with static as if the hollow itself was swallowing the connection before it could leave. The path began to twist unnaturally, turning in ways that didn't match the forest's layout she remembered from childhood. Trees were closer together now, their branches arching overhead and linking like skeletal fingers. Rhea brushed past one of the trunks and felt the bark pulse faintly beneath her fingertips, as though a heartbeat throbbed inside the wood. She jerked her hand back, but the sensation lingered, warming her skin in a way that made her stomach twist. She told herself she was imagining it, that nerves and fear were playing tricks on her, but the forest had a way of making lies feel easier to believe than the truth. A faint sound broke through the silence, something like a whisper, but stretched, distorted, as if the words were being dragged too slowly through a mouth that didn't understand how speech worked. Rhea turned sharply, scanning the shadows between the trees, but saw nothing except the shifting dark. Yet the whisper came again, closer this time, brushing the back of her neck like cold breath. It was her name. Not spoken, not called, just breathed, drawn out in a way that made it clear the thing speaking wasn't trying to communicate. It was imitating, practicing, learning the shape of her name. Rhea forced herself to keep moving, though every instinct pressed her to run. She followed the faint remnants of an old trail, one she and her brother used to explore before the hollow began gaining its reputation. But now, mark as she remembered, fallen logs, stones worn smooth by time, had changed positions as though the forest rearranged itself in her absence. Nothing looked stable. Nothing felt still. And beneath everything, she sensed a rhythm in the earth, a slow, crawling movement deep underground, like something enormous was waking. For the first time, she wondered if her brother had stepped into the hollow willingly or if he had been lured the same way she was being drawn now. As Rhea followed the warped trail deeper into Briar Hollow, she finally stumbled onto a clearing she had never seen before, though she had explored these woods countless times as a child. It was perfectly circular, unnervingly precise, as if something had carved the space out rather than nature shaping it. The ground was stripped bare of leaves and moss, revealing soil that had been disturbed recently, still dark and soft as though something had been burrowing beneath the surface. At the center lay an object she recognized instantly, her brother's backpack, half covered in dirt, the zipper ripped and dangling like a torn limb. The sight of it tightened her chest in a way that felt both familiar and impossible, an instinctive panic that told her she was standing on the threshold of something she was not prepared to witness. She approached cautiously, scanning the tree line for any movement. The woods were too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. Rhea crouched beside the backpack, brushing away the dirt with shaking hands. Inside, she found his flashlight, dead, though the batteries were new, a water bottle crushed as if squeezed by something far stronger than human, and a small notebook smeared with mud. Most of the pages were blank, except the last one, where a frantic scrawl filled the paper. The writing was messy, slanted, uneven, as if her brother hadn't had time to stop his hand from shaking while he wrote. The words were cryptic, looped phrases repeating themselves, warnings scratched so deeply the pen tore through the paper. One line repeated more than any other, "It hears the fear before the voice." Rhea felt her skin prickle. The sentence didn't make sense, but it didn't have to. It felt wrong, and that was enough. As she flipped the notebook shut, a faint tremor moved beneath her feet, gentle but intentional, like a creature shifting its weight under the soil. She froze, listening, realizing the hollow had not gone silent by accident. It was listening back. She stood slowly, backing away from the disturbed ground, trying not to make sudden movements. But something shifted at the edge of the clearing, a shape she couldn't see fully, only the outline, framed by the unnatural pattern of trees. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs didn't seem to belong to a single body. For a moment, Rhea thought it was leaning forward, mimicking the exact posture she held. The longer she stared, the more she became aware that she wasn't trying to identify what it was, but the direction it was looking. And every instinct told her it was staring past her, not at her, as if something else behind her had finally stepped into view. Rhea did not dare turn around at first. The sensation of being watched rooted her to the spot, locking her breath in her chest as cold prickled down her spine. The presence behind her wasn't subtle, it pressed into the air like a weight, thicker and heavier the longer she stood still. The trees seemed to tilt inward, their branches leaning closer as if trying to hear what would happen next. When she finally forced herself to turn, her movement slow and deliberate, she saw nothing at first, just the dim shapes of trunks and shadows stretching unnaturally far. But then her eyes caught something out of place, a handprint in the soil, freshly formed, its fingers too long and curved slightly as if whatever left it had claws instead of nails. She stepped back instinctively, but the ground gave a subtle shift beneath her, like something just under the surface was following her retreat. The tremor rippled outward, disturbing the soil in a slow, deliberate pulse. Rhea's breath quickened as she scanned the clearing again, and this time, she spotted what the shadowed figure earlier had been staring at. Just beyond the tree line, barely visible through the tangled branches, something moved. It wasn't walking or crawling, it was unfolding, rising up from a crouched position with a fluid, unnatural motion that made her stomach twist. The outline was distorted, like a silhouette stretched wrong, limbs bending at angles human joints couldn't allow. As it straightened, the air changed. The temperature dropped sharply, frosting her exhale in the dim light. The creature didn't step forward, instead, it tilted its head, slowly, too slowly, as though testing how far its neck could turn without snapping. Rhea clutched her brother's notebook, the edges digging into her palms, grounding her in the moment. A faint sound drifted toward her, not a growl, not a breath, but something like her brother's voice, whispering her name in the same trembling cadence he used on his final voicemail. Her heart lurched. She knew it wasn't him, but hearing that familiar tone twisted the fear inside her into something deeper, something desperate. The creature was mimicking him, just as the forest had mimicked her name earlier, learning, refining, practicing. The whisper came again, closer this time, though the creature's mouth, if it had one, did not move. The sound came from everywhere at once, surrounding her, echoing through the trees in layered, broken patterns. Rhea stepped back toward the path she came from, only to realize it no longer looked the same. The forest had shifted again, rearranging itself, closing off the direction behind her while subtly shaping a new path to her right. It wasn't giving her an escape. It was guiding her, pushing her toward something deeper within the hollow, something her brother had likely seen before the forest swallowed his voice completely. Rhea followed the path the forest carved for her, though every instinct warned that nothing born from Briar Hollow could ever be trusted. The trees pressed closer the deeper she went, their branches arching and twisting into shapes that resembled limbs reaching out to touch her. The air thickened with each step, dense with the damp smell of soil recently disturbed. The ground beneath her boots felt softer than before, almost sponge-like, as though something living pulsed sluggishly beneath the surface. She tried not to imagine what it might be. She tried not to imagine whether her brother had walked this same path, trembling the same way she did now. The memory of his voice kept echoing in her head, not the words themselves but the panic behind them, the quiet surrender she hadn't noticed until now. Ahead, a faint glow began to bleed between the trees. It wasn't warm or inviting, it flickered like a dying ember, pulsing in and out of existence. As Rhea approached, the glow brightened enough to reveal a cavernous hollow in the earth, as if the forest had opened its own throat. The entrance sloped downward, the inside lined with roots thick as rope, wrapped around something beneath them. She hesitated, her pulse hammering against her ribs, but the glow intensified, illuminating something metallic just inside the cavern. She stepped closer, her breath catching when she recognized the object. It was her brother's keychain, hanging from a root like it had been placed there intentionally for her to find. The realization hit her too hard to ignore. The forest wasn't merely shifting or mimicking, it was communicating, arranging its clues, guiding her through a story it wanted her to follow. Whether that story ended with truth or terror no longer felt like a choice she could make. She knelt and reached for the keychain, but the moment her fingers brushed it, the ground trembled violently, sending dust cascading from the cavern roof. A low, guttural sound resonated from deep inside the earth, as though something enormous exhaled in recognition. The roots tightened visibly, contracting like muscles, pulling inward toward the cavern's depths. Rhea stumbled back as the glow expanded, spreading across the walls of the hollow, revealing marks carved into the roots, jagged symbols, spiraling patterns, and long gouges that looked like they had been scratched by human hands. She could feel the forest watching, waiting for her response. The air vibrated with a faint whisper, threading through the cavern like a breath brushing against her skin. This voice didn't mimic her brother. It whispered something older, something unrecognizable, yet it carried an intention she understood instinctively. The hollow wasn't showing her where her brother had vanished. It was showing her where he still was, and deeper inside, something shifted in a way that felt like it was preparing for her arrival.